So we will use this time to answer questions that you may have, and you can just take a moment to kind of reflect on that. But a lot of people come to Buddhism because of their stresses, because of anxiety, depression, hopes, fears, and looking for a way to establish some sort of stability in a time which is pretty crazy. And I think as the days go on, things just seem to get crazier and crazier. So for most of us, our minds are such that we create a certain amount of drama in our lives. And the anxiety part is when we start time traveling. We're all time travelers. So we have this habit, this habitual pattern, of projecting into the future. And then we ruminate over, what we have to do and what the future will be like. Invariably, it's not like that. But that's what I mean by time traveling. We kind of imagine what it might be like. Or we reflect on the past and ruminate over things we should have done, could have done, didn't do, and there's remorse, regret, a number of things. Usually it's in the negative side. And then we have this idea about ourselves in that situation, and we continually reify that or make that a solid thing, that person, that situation that happened. And we think about it, we have this habitual pattern, and that's who we think we are. And so our depression, our anxiety generally comes out of this habitual pattern and this crystallizing this sense of self based on an experience that we've created, real or imagined. And we keep, every time we go back and reflect on it, we make it even stronger. We have this identification with this supposed self. And everything that happens continues to kind of reinforce that. That's why we call these things habitual patterns. The more we do something, the more we're likely to do that in the future. So these habitual patterns create this idea, this ego, this sense of who we are. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any question about that, for starters? So meditation is kind of a fresh way to look at this without our attachment and clinging to this apparent self that really doesn't exist, but we've created this fantasy, we've created this fictional situation, and then we're stuck. We continually, as we say, reinforce this idea of a self, and that becomes our reality. Meditation gives us a little space, so we can see this, we can reflect on it, and there's various ways we can, look at this, both in the Buddhist tradition and in, modern Western psychology as well. But Buddhism, as I always say, is really a supreme psychology. So a review of the day, at the end of the day, we can kind of see those things that we've done that are successful, that lead us on the path towards virtue, and we can disengage from those things that lead us to the path of suffering and pain that is due to our wrong understanding and unvirtuous or unskillful actions. That, as we say, follows us like our shadow and leads ultimately to suffering. So the good news is, historically, we have done some good things. To be born human, to be in this situation, and to have all of the causes and conditions that have led to this particular rebirth, which, we've just had Thanksgiving, and hopefully you have given thanks for the wonderful opportunities that you have. But it is also part of this whole idea of interdependence. Sometimes, we look back and we can say we're thankful for certain things, certain accomplishments in our life that we have done. But we couldn't have done those things without a whole host of causes and conditions. For example, I have a PhD in psychology, and I can take some pride in that, so to speak. But that didn't happen by itself. There's a time I didn't know how to read. I had wonderful teachers, and reflecting on that, for example, so I can look back and say thank you to Sister Mary Elizabeth, who taught me to read. I went to 12 years of a Catholic school. So in the beginning, there was that. And now I'm also creating a book. So writing. I thank my teachers for writing, so I can write in some semblance that is communicable. And all along the way, I can say when the book is finished and it's published, I did that. But really, there are so many causes and conditions leading to that situation, and to be grateful for all of those things that led to that. How much did I have to do with it? I couldn't have done it, by myself. To think that this was my effort is really not so true. It was dependent upon many, many causes and conditions. And if we reflect on that, and we begin to have more gratitude, more appreciation for those people in our life that helped us achieve certain things or be the person that we are. And it's very easy for us to be dissatisfied, to have our dissatisfactions, and so this time of giving thanks is, I think, a time that we should not just be one day of the year, and generally that's a bunch of eating and watching sports and doing all kinds of other things, but actually to have a method that we take maybe an hour or so and have a little notebook, and we say the things that we're grateful for, ruminate on those things, be thankful for those things, instead of the things that we like to create drama. Usually we're much more interested in, if you go home with your spouse or loved ones, and they ask how your day was, it's like, oh, it was terrible, you wouldn't believe it, the traffic was terrible, and I went to order, and they didn't have what I wanted, and it took so long for that meal to come, and it just, instead of the meal, instead of, the car started when I turned on the key, we have so much to be grateful for, but generally we don't think of those things. We think of the things that have gone wrong. And so to take the time to think of the things that have gone right is a very useful and appropriate consideration. Meditation, really. So our meditation, that we do, I started talking about meditation. Usually we want to bring ourselves back to the moment, and we want to re-embody ourselves. So our focus is on the breath. So breathing in, breathing out. So you find, we just spent an hour in meditation, those of you who were here previously, and hopefully you're doing a daily practice. The idea is to bring yourself back to this moment. So you're not time traveling, and you're actually present in this moment. And we usually use the breath to do that. So one focuses on the breath. So maybe the cool on the inhale, warm on the exhale. You feel it where you're breathing. So when I'm taking a breath in, I'm feeling it in my chest expanding. You may feel it in the belly. You may feel it in the nostrils. But bring your awareness to that moment of the breath. Uncontrived, you're not trying to change the breath in any way. You're bringing your awareness to the breath. So that will disengage you from that time travel. Question, concerns, anything about that? So meditation, again, we can always say that the Buddhism is about cultivating virtue, avoid doing harm to oneself and others, and to tame the mind. So we want to tame the mind in that we see reality. We talked about the Four Noble Truths, and we've talked about the paramitas, and we've talked about those other things in our other classes. But all of these things require a certain introspection, require a certain mindfulness, require a looking, turning the gaze inward at how we are. Not only, usually we say, oh, how come that, if there's a problem, how come that person doesn't understand? How come they can't be more gentle? How come, this, that, and the next thing? But you can turn that the other way. Why can't I be more understanding? Why can't I be more gentle? So that has to do with having a gentle heart, a warm heart, an accepting heart. You know, in the Asian culture, the word for mind and heart are the same. Shen in the Chinese and Shin in the Japanese. But they're the same. Same word, means mind and heart. So we're influenced by our feelings, we're influenced by our emotion, we're influenced by the thought that we think, and as we integrate body, mind, spirit, our actions become more integrated. If we're in conflict, if we're in contradiction, if we have a cognitive dissonance in what we're experiencing, there's an immediate loss of energy. You know, we're going to be tired at the end of the day, we're going to be discombobulated, but if we're acting in harmony with our heart and our mind, in continuity with our interactions, that will bring us great happiness, well-being, joy, and actually health. It affects our neurotransmitters, it affects our hormones, it affects every aspect of our body, mind, spirit. So meditation is a way to harmonize our body, our mind, our heart, our spirit. Gives us that integration.
I was driving this morning to Gainesville, and the clarity of the brisk weather was really inspiring, and I was in this contemplative mood, my thoughts. But I realized that even in contemplation, I'm sort of reifying duality. Its duality became reified. Even in these inspiring spiritual thoughts, I was a time-bound spiritual traveler, if you will, by even contemplation. And I saw how my senses were not in the moment. They were in concepts, even though spiritual. And I saw how unenlightened that was, and how someone who is in stillness is really in bare attention with the impinging signals of the environment into their psychosomatic experience. Far different from contemplation. And I saw how all this spiritual effort, all these techniques, all these maneuverings to clarify these obscurations are just the raft to bring us to the further shore, and that this perspective of Mahamudra, someone who would alert us to the hindrance of the raft, it seems we need more attention on how trying, how effort causes us hindrances. From this momentary, moment-by-moment experience of the miraculousness of the now. Could you comment on the hindrance of contemplation and spiritual effort?
As you say, it's a raft, and it takes you to the other shore. You can't get to the other shore without it. The other shore is liberation, but it takes a raft. It takes a method. That's why the Buddha taught so many different ways. But there is a point where there's no more meditation, and you don't. Once you're at the other side, you don't keep carrying the raft around. But it is true. So those moments that you have of clarity like that is kind of vipassana. You look at the thought, you see the thing. No, that's not reality. That is a cognitive belief structure, empty of any essentialness to it whatsoever. But without that understanding, you're lost in cognition. But you can just be there with the breath and hopefully driving the car so you don't smash into the one that's in front of you. But it does take a certain cognition, and that's the nature of the mind, is to think, to process, compare, analyze, and we need that, to survive. But it is also, we understand the twofold nature of ultimate reality beyond cognition and relative reality. Those things are simultaneously going on. And the Buddha sees those both in totality. So the liberation that comes when you arrive at the other shore, no, you can abandon the raft. But between now and then, you can't come to that moment of clarity knowing, without knowing, that the nature of the mind is empty.
Didn't the Buddha give up under the Bodhi tree? I mean, it was not through effort. We hear about these stories, his vowing to sit until he became enlightened. And didn't he have to, isn't surrender the bottom line? I mean, didn't he have to give that up?
But he had to arrive at that place that required causes and conditions. To write the book, it doesn't write itself. To attain realization requires attention and a practice, and then ultimately it is true that there's the whole thing about gradual enlightenment and sudden enlightenment. Those are both the same. I mean, you have to have a certain realization that comes immediately, but it's done once you set the design for that, and you can wake up. So there's karmic causes and conditions. And these, you have to have a certain amount of merit. You have to cultivate virtue, the paramitas that we talked about. These are the stages of development of a bodhisattva that ultimately lead to the ultimate realization of Buddhahood. So all the things that we talked about, generosity, patience, diligence, morality, concentration, meditation, all those things are necessary as a part of the raft that takes us to the other side. Does that answer your question? Does that make sense?
Well, isn't it true that it wasn't his indomitable will that precipitated his satori?
I think his discipline, attention, and had a lot to do with it. And again, we're looking at one life. If you look at the lives of the Buddha, he had to attain certain realizations in each one of those lives. So it just didn't happen under the Bodhi tree like that. It was causes and conditions since beginningless time that led to that.
Yeah. This interaction brings to mind the metaphor of peeling away layers of manifestation that obscure the direct perception of what is. So those layers have to be eroded through observation or the methodologies that the Buddha provided for us. Without those methodologies, we wouldn't have a structured approach to addressing the obscurations that arise in consciousness. Question I raise...
We've been doing this since beginningless time. So far we haven't quite unpeeled them all, but we are still on the path, and we've done enough, evidently, to put us in a situation where the teachings of the Buddha are available. We've said, okay, these are valuable, I think I should practice them, and we're engaged in that. And we make that aspiration until, and that's why, when you take refuge, I take my refuge until enlightenment is reached. Not just for this lifetime, but until enlightenment is reached. So we have that intention, aspiration, that seed of enlightenment that carries from lifetime to lifetime, and we progress along the path.
My question is more about the three realms that Buddha describes the kayas. And I look back to certain times when I was much younger and utilized certain facilitators to experience the realms of light, if you will, where everything dissolved, including the physical form, into manifestations of light. Would that be considered a Sambhogakaya experience of some sort, or what? Or just another delusion, or?
Well, when we see these beings such as Chenrezig, who have the Sambhogakaya form is not a solid. It's like a rainbow. It doesn't have any substance. So it is like light. So yeah, it is a different level of perception, a different level of manifestation. This is a very gross level based on our gross things, but there are other levels that are very different than this other.
That constitutes a more refined awareness of this so-called gross layers, which are vibrationally slower than the more subtle layers, which are vibrationally more rapid, if you will. But my question also involves, does one at a deeper level of progression along this path integrate simultaneously the awareness of this light experience with the outer form experience? Is that operative simultaneously in one who's more awakened?
Yeah, it's part of your, yes, we have all those qualities already.
Right. And finally, the term I use of essence, which I equate with Dhammakaya, does that have any tangible substance? Is there any
It's formless.
What's that? I know it's formless, but is there any tangibility?
No, out of that comes the Sambhogakaya, which is form, and the Nirmanakaya.
I know it's unmanifest, but is there any tangibility to it?
Only.
And how is it experienced if it has no tangibility whatsoever? I mean, in the stream of consciousness.
It's just awareness. It's just clarity. It's lucid awareness.
So again, perhaps in one who's a very accomplished bodhisattva or Buddha, the three realms, if you will, are experienced
Simultaneously. Yeah, there's no dichotomy. There's no duality. If you have one, then immediately you have something else. So this is non-dual, and it's hard for us to think that way.
It must be, I mean, from my own limited experiences, it must be extremely demanding to operate functionally in this so-called realm that we're operating in, operating consciously from, even just from Sambhogakaya and form realm, simultaneously to take care of business, so to speak. You know, it must be very compellingly difficult to operate. I mean, the closest I come to it in terms of trying to capture is to utilize some of the martial arts and the movement associated, the deeper movement of the martial arts and Tai Chi, where one is operating in the energetic quality of being, where one could utilize that reasonably skillfully in dealing with one's demands, if you will.
Yeah, so the Zen thing is wu wei, or not non-striving. It just happens of itself. But there's a quote that I like by Albert Einstein, who said, "Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one." We're constantly creating that over and over and over again, and we believe it. But as Einstein said, who was a good thinker, reality is merely an illusion. But we are so attached to it, and we keep it alive every moment. or it would dissolve. We'd see it as, lucid, just awareness. This quality is just the Dharmakaya.
So-called psychotic patients, many of whom, when I was operating in that world, hallucinating, having visions, to me, were very close to living in a more subtle reality, only making attributions to it with a mind that's still obscured. But it was so convincingly different than the conventional existence that the rest of us are operating in, that they were considered insane. But actually, in many respects, they were closer to a subtler appreciation of what's going on.
Maybe they were just crazy. And,
Maybe we're just crazy.
yeah, well, we are. There's no question. But they're crazy in a different way. Their little neurotransmitters are, projecting a particular kind of reality in their brains, and they believe it, so they're afraid of the thing in the corner, or there's all kinds of things going on with that. Equally illusory, generally. So I wouldn't aspire to be that and think you're closer to Buddhahood, necessarily.
No.
They are paranoid.
Oh, there's all kinds of delusions. Paranoid's one of them. Paranoid's one of them, but there's lots of them.
If you suffer from positive psychosis, then maybe you can call that some kind of enlightenment. But as long as there's fear, as long as that's a terrible delusion.
Yeah, some of the crazy yogis would say, oh, they need to be on some kind of tranquilizer or something. They're just crazed. But
An Abhidhu in India isn't going to worry about health insurance. And he is truly a happy idiot. He's truly beyond convention. And truly, it seems to me, beyond self.
well, those two would, yeah, if that is the case, and you would have to realize self is a convention. It's a made-up. It's a belief. It's a structure that keeps us bound.
But crazy yogis, many of whom are teachers, utilize that particular modality of action to
As expression of,
to
yeah,
express
that's correct.
Dharma.
And for those who can understand it and see it as such, I mean, if they were here, they'd be locked up in a heartbeat.
Well, Trungpa Rinpoche is a perfect example. His early years in Scotland, he acted completely outside the convention, and many students were completely freaked out, but others saw the teaching in the module of his behavior.
The teachers teach in different ways, and different students will be attracted to them based on, their karmic causes and conditions as well. So you have to be discriminating, so that there are people who are generally crazy, calling themselves teachers, and there are those who also appear crazy and are enlightened, but it's hard for a non-enlightened person to be able to sort that out and discriminate which is which. So you have to be careful in that regard, and check out the teacher and how, there's lots of things that go in the teacher-student relationship, which is another topic that we will talk about along the way, but it's very important. Just like I was saying, that I had to have a teacher to help me read and to help me write. We certainly need a teacher to help us train our mind, that is skilled and knows the terrain and knows the parameters, and that has the skill in teaching. So that's important. Particularly in the Vajrayana, our tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, the teacher plays a very important role. And so, other questions?
Can Tantra be considered an antechamber to the experience of truth?
Of course, yeah. Yeah, it's a vehicle. It's, again, this is the Vajrayana vehicle, the fast track, where one really sees themselves for who they are. And the yidam practices and mantra, it's also called mantrayana, because it employs several different means for purification. And you see this world as a pure land. So meditation is an important tool in that process until one, there's the kind of gathering the information, practicing that, realizing that, and then ultimately letting it go. And there is a stage of no more meditation, but that is a advanced stage of development. And it takes, this path that we had already spoken about, the paramitas, which is the path that every bodhisattva goes through to attain the state of Buddhahood, just as the Buddha did. He had to have all these perfections, and perfection means perfection. Perfect generosity, perfect patience, perfect morality, perfect ethics, perfect discipline, perfect concentration, perfect meditation, understanding, realization. So as one cultivates those things, that's what leads to final Buddhahood. And there's a big difference between levels of bodhisattvas, and there's a big difference between bodhisattva and Buddha. So it is a continuum in a certain way. I mean, ultimately, yes, we do have Buddha nature. We do have this quality. It exists, but it has to be realized. Just like the Buddha said when he met with his 5 former students, that he was awake. He awakened to his Buddha nature, but he had been practicing, not just in this lifetime, but since beginningless time, all these qualities that we were talking about, perfecting himself in those ways.
So Mahamudra, Mahalati, all these practices in the different traditions would you consider no more meditation practices?
That's where they lead to, Dzogchen, all those things. In the beginning, they're not.
There are preliminary practices in each of them that one does.
Yes, to prepare the ground.
Mahamudra, as I understand it, is really non-meditation as such. It's the culmination of all these preliminaries that they introduce in the training.
Ultimately, yes. Did you have a question?
How do I get through the day with all of its provocations?
How do you do it now?
I struggle.
And the struggle is generally due to?
Reactivity.
I think you answered your own question. The reactivity is optional. So we all have different sort of pain thresholds as well. And this is a samsaric world in that, the Buddha's first rule, the first noble truth, is that there's suffering. And what creates that suffering is this attachment to ourself, our attachment to our ideas, our attachment to the way we things should be, and our resistance to those things when they don't happen the way we think they should. And then, why does this always happen to me? And we get into the catastrophe. That's optional. So by feeling grateful for the things we have, and seeing those particular situations as opportunities to cultivate loving kindness and compassion, patience, generosity, these kinds of things, everything serves to further. So we say, bring it on. Whatever those resistances are, whatever those situations are, often is said to be grateful for them, because those are the situations that are grist for the mill. That's the heavy lifting we need to gain our mental muscle, and how we attend to those things. I'm not saying it's easy, but we can. It's the way we think about it is very important. We can think about it as traumatic, and we can think about it as terrible, or we can think about it as a certain opportunity and for us to cultivate these qualities that we're talking about. That makes sense?
Yeah, it's just hard to do.
It is hard to do. That's the work. But it becomes easier as we disengage from our knee-jerk reaction, which is resistance or anger or all the other things that we have habitually. That's usually how we address these things. But as they say, you can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result.
Right.
So if the result is anger, if the result is frustration, if the result is this difficulty that we feel, then we've got to take a look at this and see what is the resistance, what is the thing that's creating this difficulty, and we have to turn the gaze inside. What is it that needs to change here? And meditation gives us that kind of opportunity to disengage from the knee-jerk response that usually we follow, and it gives us an opportunity for choice, a spaciousness, a different way to respond to a situation, differently than we might have done in the past.
There is the third perspective of like in Gurdjieff practice. Instead of I am sitting, just there is sitting. Instead of I am reacting, there is reaction. I remember sending an email to Lloyd where I had to practice not using personal pronouns, I, me, we, you, our. And it was a real mental exercise for me. And I could see that even using these pronouns, I, me, my, I download the experience through language. And it seemed to me, although the Gurdjieff technique is very, very difficult to continue to practice throughout your daily experience, there is anger, there is attachment. It did seem to me in that exercise of creating these paragraphs without I, me, my, or you, it was very useful in disidentifying with self.
That's true. And that's a good exercise to do. And then you can use it and not be attached to it. Say, oh, yeah, I understand there's no me. I understand there's no I. I'm communicating a particular situation. And but once you see that, again, I use the example of a grove of bamboo. Once you cut through the bamboo and you see it's hollow, you don't need to cut the whole grove. Once you understand that the I doesn't exist, you can use it with that understanding. It's an illusion. This is all an illusion. So, but that is a good exercise to do. So you can see how many times this I, me, mine, our, as you say. That's a good exercise.
The heart of it comes back to how much you're installing your practice. Because to me, to dissolve that particular dynamic of identifying with what arises is dissolved through spaciousness, which arises from more and more practice moment to moment. The more that practice is installed, the more the spaciousness occurs and the less likely being is to identify I, mine, this.
Yeah, and as long as you have that realization, then you're that is the new norm. It's there is no I. I'm aware of using that term, but it's illusory, just like everything else. I can see, hear, touch, feel, taste.
Alan Watts was very, I thought, helpful in helping us to see that we're not beings, we're just verbs, we're just sitting, we're just walking, we're just the quantum field morphing into different shapes.
Being, yeah. Human beings. So it's good to have to contemplate these things that we do just automatically, unconsciously, to make them conscious, to be mindful. So this whole mindfulness movement, I think, is important. That we can overdo it. We can really be hyper and crazy, but there's a point of it is a tool. Mindfulness. So we're mindful when we're speaking, when we're walking, when we're talking, when we're eating, when we're driving the car, etc., etc. It's 24/7, so we just don't lapse into unconsciousness, but inevitably we will. We're not Buddhists, but we are attempting to be as awake and aware as we can be. And that will change our behavior, when we do that, when we're observing ourselves, our motives, our actions, our mind, our intentions, and we're cultivating the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. And at the end of the day, we were saying about reflecting on the things that we've done, and the things that we have done that were skillful, how things that we have done that we would like to change that were unskillful, things that happened in the last 24 hours or so, people who were beneficial to us, who helped us, that helps us maintain a sense of gratitude for all the things that and dependencies that we have on everyone else. We cannot live in this world independently. The clothes that you wear, the food that you eat, the car that you drive, it is all interdependent. There's all these things have to come together in a particular kind of way for us to have this life as we see it, as we experience it. So we should have tremendous gratitude for this. We are so fortunate in every way, but generally we tend to be very pessimistic and, oh, woe is me, you wouldn't believe, my day and how things went. But if we look at all the positive things that happened instead of all the negative things, that Thanksgiving, that really takes on a whole new meaning. And it does create a whole different resonance in our body, in our mind, in our spirit. Gratitude, forgiveness. There's a certain kind of grace, we would say, or blessing that goes with that has a very dynamic, powerful effect in cultivating these qualities that we're talking about, bodhicitta, loving kindness and compassion. That is the ultimate striving in a certain way, or practice of the bodhisattva, the mind of enlightenment.
Can you tell us the literal translation of Om Mani Padme Hum?
There is, you can see translations, but it's really more the vibration, and it is non-cognitive. So everything has vibration, everything has resonance. Om is kind of the quality of all sound, Om. It will translate as jewel in the lotus, and so the Chenrezig, the mantra of Chenrezig, he holds or she, it's non-sexual, it's not a, bodhisattvas or Buddhas don't have male or female, holds a jewel, holds a lotus, holds a rosary, but this is considered the translation, the jewel, the lotus, but it is, that really doesn't say anything. Whatever translation we can say, it's not that. It's much, much more than that. It is the quality of the essential nature of this particular bodhisattva, Chenrezig, the essence of loving kindness and compassion. So any translation that we can give to it, it's not that. Anything that we can say about Buddha nature, it's not that. The Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao. But this is the same kind of way, that vibration, just sit with that resonation as you do that, and I think the question will be answered. Anything I can say about it is just be some intellectual thing, but the truth, the reality, is the essential nature of the quality that supersedes any cognitive definition we can give to those words. Yeah.
I think for many of us as lay people, the training in cultivating awareness and action would seem to be the most important thing, because most of us, not all of us, but most of us don't have the opportunity to do great lengths of sitting meditation during a regular course of our lives, as lay people anyway, unless we're fortunate to have both the inclination to do it and the opportunity. So the fact of the matter is that most of us are operative in activity in one form or another during the course of every day. And getting off the pillow, and then conducting oneself for hours and hours and hours in diverse forms of activity without proper training is really the source of a lot of suffering for most of us that study, because we don't have instilled the methodology of employing mindfulness awareness in our actions. So to me, that is the biggest challenge for most lay people, is how do I do that? Because my mind is, as this young lady said, reacting to so many events in the course of my actions during the course of the day. And I don't yet have the methodology installed sufficiently so that I'm engaged in that rather than in the reactive nature of how I deal with my life circumstances. So I know I was fortunate to have certain training.
Yeah.
And we were taught in one school that I studied in to stay in the sensations of the body. And the more one stays in the sensations of the body during these actions, the mind is at rest. The mind is engaged in those sensations. So consequently, what happens for me, and I think for many of us that study, we get a clearer and non-reactive vision of what we're engaging in. We're not reacting to the circumstance. We're seeing it, but we're grounded in the sensations. Because mantras are wonderful, but again, if you're conversing with someone or whatever, you're doing something that's cognitive, it's very hard to be going Om Mani Padme Hum while you're studying some course.
Yeah, no, you don't need to be doing that when you're when you're engaging with someone. You're engaging with someone. That's the practice.
And if you're feeling the vocal cords and the emanation of speech and the sound off the inner ear, then you're grounded.
Yeah, sound and emptiness. I mean, this is a pure realm. So if you have that idea, that is great. But you've disengaged from the world to get that point of view. It is considered important to, at some level, disengage, and you have to have a certain level of renunciation to say this world is illusory. I can beat my brains out trying to make $1 and climb the corporate ladder, and that's where your energy and time and focus will be. And you may attain a certain level of success, fame, glory, power, but in the whole scheme of things, that's not going to lead you to Buddhahood. So one has got to decide what the important thing is and attend to it. Yeah. So it's like that.
Yeah, even if one isn't awake enough to directly perceive this world as illusory, one can perceive this world as, gee, I'm never going to have any enduring happiness, no matter what I do in this drama. I've learned that from my life.
And that's why Buddhism is, I think, so coming to the West. We have a lot of things, and people are saying, really? Is that what it's about? My bank account, my new Tesla, whatever the thing is? I'm not sure that that's going to bring you the happiness that you think it is. You know, and we're always in the future. We always think, oh, I'll be happy when I get that job. I'll be happy when I have this relationship. I'll be happy when I have this much money in the bank. I'll be happy, you know, again, fill in the blank. But that time comes and it's like, well, now what?
Yeah.
That didn't do it. So there's a point where you have to kind of wake up to that realization. It's nothing out there is going to fulfill that, quench that thirst for happiness. What will do it is having, I think we all want to have peace of mind. The thing is not going to give you peace of mind. But you know, I think when we think of the Four Noble Truths, there is suffering. There's a cause of that suffering. There's a way out of that suffering. And there's, you know, a path that leads to that, the Noble Eightfold Path. Of those three things, I think the most important thing is actually the third. There's a way out of this suffering. And of course it is but knowing that you can end suffering. It's, you can do that. And, but it won't happen without your strong aspiration, intention, diligence, and perseverance. So, you know, as you say, we come to the conclusion somewhere along the way that, okay, I have to practice. And then we do whatever it is within our reality to set the design for that, whether it's at home, or we do a weekend, or we do 3 months, or we do 3 years, or we do the, you know, whatever it is. We have to make that decision. We have to have our why. Why do we do it? Because this situation that we're in is untenable. And we've done it since beginningless time. And our life is short, so we contemplate these 4 thoughts that turn the mind that, you know, we have this precious human birth. We have this precious opportunity. Life is impermanent. We don't know how long we're going to have. The thought we're thinking right now, our karmic causes and conditions are going to lead to the next event. And that the samsara is just unsatisfactory. We're going to do something about it. We're going to do it now. So on that happy note, I think we have to stop there. Yes. Thank you for your questions.